Urgent question, Diana Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, to ask the Secretary of State for Health if he will make a statement on the responsibility for establishing an inquiry into the contaminated blood scandal.
Minister Jackie Doyle-Price.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to begin by adding my own personal apology to those who have spoken in this House on previous occasions about the tragedy of contaminated blood, and to reiterate that the Government recognises the terrible impact that it has had on many thousands of lives. The Government recognises that previous inquiries into the events that led to thousands of people being infected with HIV and or hepatitis C through NHS-supplied blood or blood products did not go far enough. That is why, on Tuesday the 11th of July, the Prime Minister committed to establishing a further inquiry so that the causes of this tragedy can be fully understood. Once established, we want that inquiry to be fully independent. However, before it is established, there is a need to define the scope and format so that terms of reference may be set by the relevant Secretary of State. Given the impact this tragedy has had on so many lives, it is vital that we get this right, and we get it right from the start. I'm aware of the concerns that have been raised this week by those affected, by campaign groups and by members of this House, and indeed I spoke to the Honourable Lady on Tuesday about this very issue. So I'd like to reassure the House that the Government has as yet made no final decisions on the scope and format of an inquiry or on its leadership. I have newly taken on this policy area, and I'm keen to make sure that all those affected are given an opportunity to give us their thoughts and opinions. I understand that it is normal practice for public inquiries to be sponsored by the relevant department. However, in light of concerns raised, we are keen to listen to those concerns and ensure they are addressed, which is why we are in discussions with Cabinet Office and colleagues across Government to ensure that this inquiry does its job, does it well, and under appropriate leadership. That is why an early consultative meeting was scheduled today and hosted at the Cabinet Office, where the Secretary of State and Ministers hope to understand further the important views of those affected about the shape and establishment of an inquiry. This is the first of several meetings that the Government would like to offer over the coming weeks, and I strongly encourage anyone affected to give us their views. Our door is open for anyone who wants to discuss the inquiry or raise any concerns they may have. It is important to note that whatever arrangements are agreed for this independent inquiry, there will be safeguards put in place to ensure independence. For instance, by ensuring that the Secretary to the inquiry has never worked at the Department of Health or any of its agencies. I reiterate, we are absolutely committed to a thorough and transparent inquiry, and we want to establish the best format and remit. That is why we want to hear as many opinions as possible, and we will work with those affected and members of this House to do so.
Order. Just before I call the Honourable Lady whose question it is, and I'm grateful to the Minister for the clarity of what she's just said, I should emphasise that this is not an occasion for a general debate on the contaminated blood scandal. We've had that on many occasions. I have also granted urgent questions previously to the Honourable Member from Kingston upon Hull North on this matter. The issue is very specifically the locus, the responsibility, and possibly at a stretch, indeed, the scope. And if members can tailor their questions accordingly, that would be greatly appreciated. Urgent question, Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I also thank you for granting this urgent question this morning? Whilst I welcome last week's announcement of an inquiry into the contaminated blood scandal, I, along with the vast majority affected by this scandal, their families, campaign groups and legal representatives, plus many cross-party parliamentarians, are dismayed to see the Department of Health leading on the establishment of this inquiry. The Department of Health, an implicated party at the heart of so much that has gone wrong over the past 45 years, must have no role in how this inquiry is established. It is akin, in my view, to asking South Yorkshire Police to lead an inquiry into the Hillsborough disaster, and I regret that the Government has not been able to understand that by putting the Department of Health in charge at this time, it immediately undermines their excellent decision to call a public inquiry last week, and in consequence, contaminated blood campaigners boycotted a meeting organised by the Department of Health at 10 a.m. today in protest. another department must surely now take over responsibility for consulting on the remit of this inquiry. The Minister now needs to answer 3 questions urgently, and I'm pleased that the Government acknowledged the overwhelming and unanimous opposition to the Department of Health consulting on the inquiry, including from over 250 campaigners, 10 campaign groups, the Haemophilia Society and the law firms Collins Law and Lee Day, which together represent 716 claimants. Secondly, on Tuesday the 18th of July, could the Minister explain why the Department of Health called a meeting for 10 a.m. today with just 2 days' notice in central London at a time most difficult, inconvenient and expensive for people affected to try and attend? And third, when I spoke with the Minister, she told me the Government plans to update the House by September and get the inquiry up and running as soon as possible. That had not been made clear to campaigners or MPs, and I wondered why that was. And I still believe that the case is even more pressing that another department should take over the work of establishing this inquiry now, and that department must then have a true and meaningful consultation with everyone affected so they can be fully involved and have confidence in this public inquiry.
As I mentioned in my answer to the question, there has been no firm view taken as to which department will run the inquiry, but ultimately, as the Minister with responsibility for this area, I think the House would consider it amiss if I were not having meetings and discussions with those affected about the remit of this inquiry. When my honourable friend made the statement to the House about the inquiry, we made quite clear then that we wanted to progress as soon as possible. The Secretary of State called this meeting because we want to hear directly from the victims about what they want from this inquiry. We are very much in listening mode. The decision has not yet been taken which department will run it, but ultimately, as a Minister, I'm accountable to Parliament for what happens in the Department of Health for those areas which are under my responsibility, and I want to be leading from the front having those discussions.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank the Minister for saying, as she just has done, that no decision has yet been taken about which department will run the inquiry. So does she agree that perception is as important as reality in this matter, and therefore will she take away from this occasion this morning the weight placed by honourable members on both sides of the House that perhaps it would be perceived to be more objective if some other department took the lead?
Well, I say to my honourable friend, and I've repeated this in other discussions as well, the Cabinet Office is very, very closely involved in this, and this opportunity has given me the time to actually make that quite clear to the House. The Government is listening, we want to consult as wide as possible, and no decision has yet been taken, but the Cabinet Office is very closely involved in all the consultation we're currently having.
Mrs. Sharon Hodgson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to say it is disappointing that we are here again today, so soon after the announcement last week. A week ago, the House united in agreement to finally facilitate justice for those tragically affected by this scandal. Yet in recent days, as we've heard, events have shown ministers to renege on last week's promises and have run roughshod over the affected community. You may shake your head, but that is how the community feel. We've spoken to them. There are 3 key questions, Mr. Speaker, the Minister before us this morning must answer, and I hope she will be more forthcoming with the much needed answers than she was to my honourable friend. Understandably, the community have deeply held suspicions when it comes to the Department of Health. Therefore, why are the ministers ignoring these concerns in the demands to facilitate an inquiry through another department, such as the Ministry of Justice? This has been well documented in the letter to the Prime Minister by my honourable friend for Hull North, the Haemophilia Society, the 10 campaign groups and law firms Collins Law and Lee Day. Why does the Minister think they can so easily disregard all these people? Events over the last few days have shown last week's promise to consult, engage and listen to the community were simply warm words. The audacious move to hold a roundtable meeting this morning with such little notice given to potential attendees from across the UK hinders many from being involved in the process process of setting up this inquiry. Can ministers explain why this meeting was held at such short notice, who they plan to invite so the meeting was properly consultative, and who was scheduled to attend in the end, following the mass boycotting by many who were invited, who felt this offer of a meeting was a slap in the face? It is important to have this inquiry sooner rather than later, yet not at the expense of jeopardising justice. Will the Minister publicly outline now the timetable for this inquiry? Is it the Government's intention to initiate the inquiry in September? And if so, why has this not been made public? Why is it that we must bring ministers to the House again to make this clear? Doesn't this go against everything we were promised last week? The Minister must remember the promises made just last week and ensure consultation is central to this whole process. Otherwise, they will fail this community who must have the justice they so rightly deserve.
It is in taking forward this consultation that we are delivering on the commitments made last week. We made quite clear then that we wanted to get this inquiry going as soon as possible because, frankly, these people have waited long enough for answers. We have not ignored the concerns expressed by many about the role of the Department of Health holding inquiry. I repeat again, no decision has yet been made and the Cabinet Office is very closely involved with how we're taking this forward. As for the complaints about the short notice of the meeting this week organised by the Secretary of State, it is because we want to actually hear directly from people affected as soon as possible that such a meeting was arranged before the House rises. But it is just the start. You know, we want there to be good, effective dialogue. Because, as she will appreciate, and the rest of the House will appreciate, it is very important that we all inspire confidence in this process. And given the cross-party support that we had at the time that the inquiry was announced, it's actually very disappointing that we're getting bogged down in the process right now.
Wendy Morton.
Speaker, like others in the chamber, I welcome the announcement last week from the Prime Minister about the public inquiry, and I'm encouraged by what the Minister is telling us this morning. One of my constituents who was affected has raised the issue about which department should take the lead in the inquiry, and I wondered if my honourable friend can confirm what role victims and families and campaigners will play, and how best it is for them to engage with her and her department at this stage.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for the question she's raised. Obviously, we want to hear from as many people affected as possible, and we will reflect on the representations they've made. And if they want to be very clear and very blunt about the role of the Department of Health, then again, we need to hear those representations in order that we make the best decision as to who takes this forward.
Mr. Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Honourable Lady for bringing forward this urgent question and pay tribute to her for continuously pushing this important subject to ensure we get justice for those who are so tragically affected. Going forward, the inquiry must get the right answers, and this inquiry must command the confidence of those affected. Can the Minister confirm when a decision will be made as to which department will lead on the establishment of the inquiry, and does she think that it is right for the Department of Health to lead it? Can the Minister confirm that the inquiry will include the families and victims so that they are sensitive to what they want to know? And can she confirm that the Government will ensure the inquiry will have to look at all matters, including documents, patient records, things that were altered and hidden, and things that are hiding behind the public interest barriers will be opened up so that the light can be shed on this matter, as was the case with Hillsborough?
Minister.
Just to be clear, the Department of Health is the sponsoring department for the inquiry. It will be entirely independent, and who oversees that has yet to be determined. But clearly, having made the statement and made the intention to hold this inquiry, we need to consult to make sure that the inquiry does actually reflect and answer the questions that he's made. And central to do that will be exactly that. It needs to be seen as transparent, open, independent, fully independent. And once it's established, it will be entirely removed from the Department of Health, and that should be enough to inspire confidence, providing that we get the consultation right to get the remit right.
Mr. Kevin Hollinrake.
Mr. Speaker, I have two constituents that are affected by this terrible tragedy who have already contacted me with concerns regarding the Department's involvement. This is a unique situation, and especially in the time it's taken to bring forward this inquiry, and credit should go to the Government for bringing forward that inquiry. But nevertheless, it's incredibly important justice is seen to be done. So will the Minister consult with members of the all-party group on who she determines would be the right people to oversee the scope of this inquiry.
I'm keen to hear from all members of the House and all members of the public on how they think the inquiry should be taken forward. That is the spirit in which we are embarking on this consultation.
Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the government's decision to hold this inquiry in response to my honourable friend for Hull North's campaign? But just say to the Health Minister, I know she is acting in good faith, but over many years, Health Department officials have advised that there was no need for an inquiry and also that there was no problem at the heart of this issue. And therefore, because of that, will she recognise that for many of those who've campaigned for this, it would have much greater credibility if the sponsoring department is another department, be it the Ministry of Justice or the Cabinet Office, if all of the staff do not come from the Health Department, and also if one of those other departments could be involved in the consultation and the establishment and the remit. It is no criticism of her. I know she takes this very seriously, but I would just advise her to hand this one over to another department and let them run with it instead.
I understand the point that the Honourable Lady is making, and I repeat again, the Cabinet Office is very closely involved with this at this stage. But again, I think she would consider it most remiss of me not to be taking a very close interest as this consultation is taken forward. But I can't say enough, it is absolutely essential that the way this inquiry is established must inspire confidence in those people affected, and it is that we're trying to achieve by the consultation. As I say, we want to hear from them. We are completely open-minded as to which department will actually take responsibility going forward, but right now I want to have those conversations because I want to understand their concerns with what has happened with the Department of Health, because as the Minister I need to give that challenge.
Sir Peter Bottomley.
The letter from the Honourable Lady from Hull started by expressing gratitude to the Government for the progress that's been made so far. It would have been welcomed decades ago, but it's right to acknowledge it now. The letter included 3 practical points, which I think the letter put perhaps slightly better than the front bench opposite. I think the machinery of government can't work overnight normally. I think that the questions and answers today will help government and the Prime Minister decide whether the right solution is, as my honourable friend has suggested, having another department or the Cabinet Office taking on the consultation with the Department of Health, helping as far as they can. The one point to the Department of Health now is, can they guarantee the third point of the Honourable Lady's letter, which is that no records will be destroyed, all will be available to the inquiry?
I can certainly give my honourable friend that commitment, and just to reiterate, we have made many documents available in public, all published, and I can give him every assurance that nothing will be destroyed. Having now taken the decision to hold an inquiry, we must get it right, and I'm happy to hear from honourable members at any time if they have any specific concerns about whether they think evidence is being withheld, so I can satisfy myself that is not the case.
Mrs Madeline Moon.
Mr. Speaker, this is not a matter of challenging the Minister's personal integrity at all. That is not under any doubt. What is under doubt is the wisdom of the decision to have the department that is majorly implicated in the concerns as to what happened in the past involved at any point in consultation and in taking this inquiry forward. And I hope before we go into the recess, an urgent statement can be rushed out advising that the Cabinet Office or the Ministry of Justice will now lead on not only the outline of the inquiry but also the consultation on the inquiry. Then we can have trust from those who have been involved.
Well, I say to the Honourable Lady, it is quite without precedent that at this stage, just so shortly after announcing an inquiry, that such a decision will be made. It is normal practice for the sponsoring department to embark on the consultation. And as I will repeat again, the Cabinet Office is closely involved in this from the perspective of propriety and ethics, and the Department of Health is not working alone.
Mr Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I warmly welcome the fact that an inquiry is now happening and the government's decision to undertake it, given the decades that have gone past since this issue first came up and the scandal occurred. Would she be able to reassure the victims, though, that in terms of any judicial involvement, which is almost certain in this, that the identity of the judges or judge concerned would be selected by the Lord Chief Justice, not by any government department?
That would be the normal procedure, and yes, I can give that commitment.
Christine Jardine.
Can the Secretary of State assure us that in the responsibility of this inquiry, there are real powers which will enable the inquiry to ensure that it has proper access to all the witnesses and documents necessary, and which will be vital to developing a just settlement for all those affected by this and their families, and that a fair financial system will be in place to support them, because this could take some time?
Well, that question we're really looking to be settled by this consultation, because one of the decisions that needs to be taken is exactly what shape inquiry should take place, because clearly we normally do this through a statutory inquiry, and that would have the powers that she refers to, but equally members of the House have made representations that it should be a Hillsborough-style inquiry, which by definition would be more fleet of foot. One of the reasons we're pushing forward with this consultation is to get exactly that feedback, so that we put together an inquiry that inspires confidence amongst those who have been campaigning for this for so long.
Rebecca Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Far from being negative, I think the government should be applauded for actually very swift action recently, not perhaps in the past, and they are listening. Already committed extra compensation and solving the system, and announcing the inquiry, solving this, sorting out the complex system we had before, but also the fact that we are now listening. And the right thing is, can the Minister give assurances, particularly to my constituents, that the right department will be chosen? Because we do have to give confidence that we won't, Mr. Speaker, all be here again discussing this, and we've got the chance to sort it out now.
I think that the purpose of consultation is so that people can make their points about which department thinks should oversee the inquiry, and then we will respond accordingly. So all I can say again is please encourage people to participate in this consultation.
David Hanson.
If the consultation with interest groups unanimously says that the inquiry should be held by another department, will the Minister respect that view?
What we need to do is understand exactly what their concerns are, and we're only going to achieve that by having dialogue. But I can reiterate, we are here to listen and to listen to those concerns. Now we have decided to go ahead with this inquiry. I want to make sure that we get it right.
Mims Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I again put on record how pleased I am about the commitment to hold this inquiry for my constituents and their families who've been so affected, and thank the Minister for her time listening to me on this yesterday. So does she agree with me that by listening, and only listening, to those most affected, that we can finally get the answers for the victims and their families that they are seeking?
Well, I think we can only gain from having dialogue, and it is that in that spirit that we want to have as many conversations with those people affected as possible. It's disappointing that the meeting we had this morning wasn't attended, but I hope that going forwards we will have some meaningful dialogue.
Stevens.
Mr Speaker, can I ask the Minister to reflect that it's not reasonable to ask campaign groups from Scotland to attend a meeting at 2 days' notice? And can I also ask, given that there's a distinct legal system in Scotland, has there been any thought to that in any discussions with Scottish campaign groups and or the Scottish Government?
Well, as I say, that was the first of what we hope will be many conversations, and I think the campaign groups in Scotland arrangements were made for them to dial in to the meeting so they could participate. And I have already started discussions with the Scottish Government about how this inquiry will play out and affect the position in Scotland. And I'm pleased to say that we're having those discussions in a spirit of healthy cooperation, and particularly they're looking at how we can make use of what's already been gone through with the Penrose inquiry. So we will continue to have dialogue, and we are very sensitive to those issues.
Tom Burskglove.
Mr Speaker, at the weekend I saw my constituent Sue Woffen, whose case I raised in the debate last week, and she was delighted with the government's commitment. And the one issue that she particularly wants to see considered is that of access to appropriate treatments for victims, because for most victims that is the most important issue. So will my honourable friend feed that back?
I think my honourable friend makes the point very well. This is exactly the sort of thing that we need to hear from this consultation when we're setting the scope, and clearly access to treatment is a very important issue. So I would encourage him to ask his constituent to write in and make those points.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think there's a consensus across the House, and everyone has made the point very clearly that they don't have confidence in the Department of Health running this inquiry, and I expect an announcement from the Minister soon. If it is the Cabinet Office appointed, though, the Cabinet Office does have a bit of a track record of taking rather a long time with inquiries and quite often being used to kick things into the long grass. So can she assure us that it will be a speedy but thorough inquiry?
Minister. Well, the speed at which the inquiry reports will be determined by the chairman, because the inquiry will be independent, and that's the point. At the moment, the Department of Health is leading on conversations, but the inquiry will be independent. It will not be run by the Department of Health.
Wayne David.
Health is, of course, a devolved matter. So can she give the House a commitment that there will be a maximum cooperation with all of the devolved institutions throughout the UK?
Minister. I can give him that commitment, and again, I've already had discussions with the Welsh Minister about this, and absolutely, this is a UK-wide inquiry. Health is a devolved matter, and the findings of the inquiry, obviously, we will need to work quite closely to make sure that we all respond to what that finds.
Jim Shannon.
Speaker, I can also thank the Minister for her statement and commend the Honourable Lady for Hull West for her tenacity in this issue as well. Although the Northern Ireland Health Minister allocated funding to contaminated blood victims to bring us on a par with compensation paid in the UK mainland just in December of last year, it is essential that any UK investigation includes the Northern Ireland victims, and I speak on behalf of those. And is it not done on, so it's not done on an English and Wales basis? Can the Minister confirm this to be the case?
Again, I can reassure the honourable gentleman that we are very sensitive to the facts that will apply to Northern Ireland, and we will, by all means, ensure that the requisite dialogue takes place so that we deal with that sensitively.
Thank you.